Hi, my name's Jasper. I started a YouTube channel called Clay Woven, and it's about exploring 3D printing with ceramics in Blender. Why I'm posting this first video is a few weeks ago I realized a post that I'd put on a subreddit for clay 3D printing had been reposted and was at the top of the sub for the second time. And I realized this must be quite popular and it would be worth doing a video explaining how I did it. I'm using a combination of Blender and a plugin from Nozzleboss on Instagram, who's got a plugin for importing and exporting Gcode into Blender. He does a lot of interesting projects using this plugin that he's built, so you can find him here. But importantly for what I want to show you, his plugin is available on his GitHub. If you want to install it, you can download as a zip file and then add that to your Blender add-ons, install from disk. Once you've installed it from disk, it should show up here. Yeah, Nozzleboss, I've got it already installed. Okay, so once you've installed the Nozzleboss plugin in Blender, it comes up as a tab on the right hand side, and it's got a few settings for importing and then exporting Gcode. In between, it's got some settings for how you want that Gcode to be processed. I'm going to start with a new model. I want to add a mesh and a cylinder. I want 128 faces. I want the radius to be 50 and I want the depth to be 100. Now I want to move this model up so that it's sitting on the ground plane, which is this red line. So I will go into edit mode and go GZ50. That's brought it up to the ground plane. Export as STL. So now when I've exported as STL, I can move over into Cura, which is the slicing program I'm using. I think you can use any slicing program you want. Open file, video. Okay, so now we've got our basic pot. I've got a basic settings for the slicing of a layer height of 1.5, a line width of 5 mm, wall thickness of 5 mm, line count of 1, and print as vase mode. Oh yeah, sorry, not called vase mode, it's called spiralize outer contour. If you check this box, then it will slice it in spiral mode rather than as a solid object. So when you slice and preview, if I export this back to the same folder, then I can switch back to Blender and go to the Nozzleboss plugin. I want to subdivide and I want to put that at 0.4, I think, maybe 0.5. And it's creating extra subdivisions in the Gcode when it imports. It makes it easier to sculpt later on. So I import Gcode and I select the Gcode that I've just created in Cura and import. If I hide this one for a second, this is the new Gcode. There's a little issues I've found with it, that for some reason in vase mode, Cura overlaps the last layer, which is a bit irritating. Maybe it doesn't matter so much when it's printing plastic. When it's printing clay, it tends to make it makes a squishing mess on the top layer. And it also creates this weird thing here where it extrudes too much on the first layer. What I do to solve that normally, get the Gcode file, open this in a text editor, and then scroll down to the bottom. There will be a point where there's a G0 movement rather than a G1. And this one, if you look, it's actually exactly the same as the one above, except there's no extrusion and it just moves down a little bit. This is what's making this. I don't know why it does this, but it's not needed. So just delete that and save, and I'll delete the Gcode, and I'll import I'll import it again. So now it should be one complete spiral, but it's still overlapping a little bit. What I do is I go into face select, view selected, connected only, linear, and what I want to do is create a nice finish to the top of the pot. So I want to reduce the extrusion rate and not lift up the nozzle height as fast for the last bit, just to create a leveling off at the top. Select the surface, scale Z 0.01, and then I extend that scale right round until it does a couple of loops, usually like that. Then GZ, move it up. So now I've got a gradual finish. It doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, as long as it gradually tapers off to the top. You need to do that at the start as well, and you also need to create this weird little thing here. That one. And I want to move that up, so it's get rid of the, I want to move it up here. So this is the start of the Gcode, but the start of the Gcode is extruding at full volume over the top of the last layer, which creates an over-extrusion for that. So I want to do the same thing again and shrink it down. So I go scale Z 0.01, and then bring that right round till just about there, and GZ, move it down. So now I've got that first layer is just gradually growing and growing and growing until it reaches a full-size layer back at the start. That means it starts off nice and smoothly. I haven't really explained exactly what this is, but I think it's fairly obvious. When you import from Nozzleboss into Blender, it creates the Gcode represented by a single extrusion of faces. You see here, it's when I expand the selection, it's expanding only on a single line, so it's not a solid surface, it's a spiral going all the way up. So this is the toolpath created, and it's, if you measure the height, it's 1.49. So this is the 1.5 layer height that I set in Cura. And the reason why there's so many divisions in this surface is because when I set the import to a 0.5, that's why each square is 0.5 long. Okay, so I've got a spiral tube that represents the imported Gcode. So this Gcode then can be edited and then sent back out to your slicer by exporting. It'll export to the same file and under the same file name as you saved it. So here it's called Video 1 Blender. Now, if I go to File, Open Files, I've got a Video 1 Gcode. Open that. Cura doesn't like showing these previews very well, but this is the Gcode. If I open it in Prusa Slicer, it's a little bit easier to see. I think Prusa Slicer is a slightly better Gcode preview. I should probably use Prusa Slicer for everything because it's faster, but I have a profile set up in the Cura with my 5mm line width, so I haven't bothered moving over. So if we go File, Gcode Preview, Open, and this is the Gcode preview this is the preview of the Gcode that I just created. The line width is wrong. The line width I haven't set up yet. In my Cura profile, open recent, in my Cura profile I've set it up as a line width of 5mm. But if I come over to here, I've got the nozzle width of 0.4. Now nozzle width here is not the same as line width. For some reason the nozzle width calculates at 1.5 times the line width. It's hard coded into the that's hard coded into the Nozzleboss plugin. I think that's probably because they found that setting works better with plastic, but for me I need to set the line width to exactly the same size as my nozzle. Because I want 5mm nozzle, I need 5 divided by 1.5, so I get 3.33. So if I put a 3.33 nozzle width there and export the Gcode again, and then if I reload from disk, now it's wider. Still doesn't quite fill the gaps, but it should be okay. But you can see here on the flow rate, it's gradually reducing the flow rate on the top, and it's gradually increasing the flow rate on the bottom as it gradually increases the layer height. So we've got the Gcode imported. Now we want to do something interesting with it. One of the simplest things you can do is select a service, select one part of the Gcode and select linked, and then check a deselect. Then I can choose how many I want to deselect and how many I want to select. So on this one I want to create lines like this. If the pattern doesn't line up properly, you can offset it a bit until it does. Maybe like that. Okay, now I can assign that pattern to the model. Select it again. So now this pattern lines is stored as a vertex group for this model. What that means is I can then come back to do it, select it, and then scale. And I can create little zigzag patterns like that. Now that's one way of doing it. You can also change the fall off, so if you want spheres, select, scale everything but Z, not Z, and now I've created a little ball shaped. So this is how you can create quite fast little ribs on your model. So for a simple pattern, you can explore with creating vertex groups and then scaling them in different ways. There's a whole load of different patterns you can create quite fast and quite easily. And something like this is much easier to do than if you're doing it before the Gcode, because it follows each line individually rather than being sliced and then creating strange artifacts where each loop doesn't quite match up with a piece of a line in the Gcode. The next thing you can do, which I did on the previous design is you can start sculpting with it. So if we go over to sculpting, where is my model? There. And I choose a sculpt brush. Where's a nice sculpt brush? So I'll try elastic grab. I can pull the Gcode like this. So this is quite fun. You can do all sorts of strange things like this, and you can see it moves the Gcode as well. You can create almost any pattern you can think of just by sculpting. You can pull, you can push. So on the model I did, I just pulled up 2 areas like that, so it felt a little bit like a basket hanging. But the other thing I did was use cloth brushes. If I use a cloth brush, I can pull and pretend the material's cloth. The trouble is, you try and do the cloth brush and it doesn't work. The reason the cloth brush doesn't work very well on this model is that the cloth brush is expecting a solid sheet of faces, but what we've got here is a line of faces that spirals up. So the cloth brush has got something to work with. You have to create an object that it can edit separate from the Gcode. So first of all, I want to go over to the original model. I can take this original model and duplicate it, hide the original. Then I want to delete that surface. So now I have the pot, but without the top surface. What I can do then is I want to move this new pot over the existing one. So if I go here, select that loop, and then do cursor to selected, go to selection to cursor, and I've got them lined up nicely. Now they don't quite match because since I've edited this Gcode in Cura and brought it back in and then edited it again afterwards, it's slightly different shape. So you can then select this model, scale it from the 3D cursor, scale Z, bring it up, scale all but not everything but Z, and bring it in so it overlaps. Now what I want to do, create a way of editing the Gcode I want to model. So this cylinder here, let's call it sculpt. I want to link the Gcode to the sculpt. So if I go to the modifiers and I choose deform, surface deform, I can then select the sculpt as the surface deform, and then I bind it here to bind them together, and then everything I do on the surface. So now if I go to the sculpt and hide the Gcode, go into sculpting view, find my cloth modifier, say for example pull. There's not enough geometry on this to really pull properly. But if I go back here, I go to my Gcode, my Gcode has followed the sculpt. Now that's not worked as well as it could, so let's undo. But what you need to do to make it work is before you link them, let's go back to the Gcode, unbind, hide the Gcode, find the sculpt. I want to come in here and I want to create even geometry around the sculpt, so there's just as many horizontal as vertical. So if I move that up until I've got squares, now I've got something better to model with. How big are these? These are 2.3 millimeters apart. So there's still quite a lot bigger than the Gcode geometry. I just added the loop cuts to this cylinder to add extra geometry to sculpt with. What I've realized is I don't need this bottom surface, so I'm going to delete the faces here. So I've just got the outside surfaces, which is the surface I want to sculpt. I'm going to add a bit more geometry to it as well by subdividing it one more time. So now when I go over to my Gcode and I've selected my sculpt from the target, I can bind to the target. So now when I want to sculpt the sculpt layer, it will also appear on the Gcode. Select the sculpt layer and move over to the sculpting window. First of all, I want to mask off the bottom of the pot using B and select. That just means that I'm not going to sculpt right to the, my sculpt doesn't affect right at the bottom of the pot, so that still matches up with the base. You can always clear the mask with Alt M, or you press B and you can create a new mask. I'm using the cloth boundary brush. By default, the boundary brush has got a constant fall off and it's on twist, which will create an effect like this, which can be useful, can be quite fun for some things. But what I did on the Reddit post is I put it on expand and I changed it to brush radius, so I can pull up there and pull up there, make it feel a bit like it's being grabbed by something. Then maybe reduce this down and maybe make a bigger brush. Yeah, that's more like it. I was trying to get it to feel like they're connected. Something like that. Oh, that's better before. Anyway, this is only a quick way of playing around with it. You've got to be careful that you've got enough clearance on your printer to be able to go up and down around that radius. I modified the printer slightly so that I could increase the clearance. I'll maybe share a quick video on how I did that at some point. It's not too hard though. If you've got a pot like this, when you switch back to the Gcode, the Gcode is following the sculpt. So now you've got the pattern ribs, and then you've also got the folds created in the fabric. And if you use this in combination with different sculpting tools and different fabric patterns, you can create interesting effects. I can then take this entire design and apply the modifier and export. If I then open it back up in the Gcode preview and reload, I've created this non-planar, slightly interesting pot design. Give it a go. Let me know if you've got any problems, and let me know what I'm messing up. Let me know what I'm doing well. Leave a comment below, or my Instagram is ClayWovenOfficial.